In a provocative documentary, Afterward, Israeli first-time filmmaker Ofra Bloch explores the narratives of hatred behind the Holocaust and the Israeli occupation. The film consists of on-camera interviews with survivors, former neo-Nazis, Israelis and Palestinians. The film is now available to be viewed on digital and streaming platforms. Let's take a quick look at the trailer.
I felt compelled to know how Germans of today deal with feelings of guilt for the Holocaust. And I realized I have to talk to Palestinians.
Whenever Palestinians want to discuss the occupation, the Holocaust is brought up to silence them. The history of the Holocaust is silencing the word.
I viewed photography as a weapon. The difference is this is more powerful than holding a real weapon. What I'm trying to say is we have another way.
The Israeli, or like me, are we still the enemy?
No, absolutely no. The enemy is the occupation, the system, the idea. The occupation is our common enemy.
I grew up in this culture where the Holocaust was not discussed. I take Palestinian students to visit Auschwitz. They never realized that the idea was to annihilate people.
We are living in a reality in which the more Israelis breathe, the more we choke.
We could have become like them. This is what we have to remember always.
I wonder if any of us have learned from the past.
And joining us now from New York is the film's director, Ofra Bloch. Ofra, thank you so much for joining me. Ofra, the film consists of several conversations from a number of different viewpoints, from Nazi descendants through to Palestinians. Now, why is it important for you to compare the two? And what impact did speaking with these people have on you personally?
Well, you know, it's a big question. I should start maybe by saying that the name of the film, Afterward, it points in two directions. It points to the past, to something big that happened, and over which we have no control, and it points for the future, to the future over which we do have control. And the idea is, how do we change the future? And I'm trying in this film to advocate for listening. And I go and listen to people. It's not that I'm comparing them, but they are both, the Germans and the Palestinians in the film, belong to groups of people that I was raised basically to fear and hate. And I wanted to experience talking to that other and see what happens. And it really came out of my interest in the transference of trauma between generations. Growing up in Israel, you know, in the 50s and 60s, I basically grew up among second-generation Holocaust survivors. And all of a sudden, after so many years, I realized that I don't know anything about the experience of descendant of Germans. And this is where the film started. I had no idea at the time that I will end talking to people in Palestine. I, first of all, started, you know, with the Germans.
Now, Ofra, you interviewed Palestinian victims who have lost loved ones at the hands of Israelis. Did this have any effect on you?
The thing is that when I went to talk to the Germans, I was in a way representing a descendant of victims, my generation. So, but when I went to talk to the Palestinians, there was suddenly a switch. And I realized the very short distance between being a victim and becoming a victimizer. And the experience of talking to the Palestinians and really entering their experience, you know, had a huge impact on me. I think that at the moment I'm standing in the playground that was built to commemorate the daughter of Bassam Aramin, who was shot by an Israeli soldier. She was 10 years old. Standing with him there and looking into his eyes, I felt an enormous amount of shame and responsibility. And realization that though I live in the United States for 40 years, I am also part of the problem. I'm part of the occupation. And it was very important for me to do something about that and not become a bystander. I'm trying to give the legacy to my own kids that we cannot be bystanders. Talking to various Palestinians had similar impact. I don't mean that it included endorsing everything I heard, but it meant really listening without judgment, which is a hard thing to do because you really need to surrender to the narrative of the other. But I also was able to see what is the effect of my listening has on them, and how, in a way, when somebody is being listened to, it disarms them, and there is more chance that they will be able to listen to you as well.
So, Ofra, did you ever consider taking it a step further with these interviews and maybe speaking and listening to extremists from both ends of the spectrum?
I was not interested in this particular film to deal with violence. It came up in one of the interviews, but I really wanted to deal... In Germany, I was really looking for people who were dealing with the Holocaust still on a daily basis in some form or another. When I came to the Palestinians, I was really looking for people who resist the occupation in a non-violent way. That was my main interest, so I did not look, for extremists. I don't think I would have been able to interview a Nazi, but I think I would be able to listen to extremists or extreme Palestinians, yes. But that was not the angle that I chose to take.
And does this have anything to do with the fact that you're actually a psychoanalyst as well as a filmmaker? I mean, was there always a correlation between the two professions for you?
Oh, definitely. It's interesting because I think both professions need the same skill set, in my opinion. And I am an unschooled filmmaker. I'm basically a psychoanalyst who had a lot of chutzpah and went and made a film. So, I mean, the listening skills of a psychoanalyst really put emphasis on that particular kind of listening to the other, to stand in the footsteps, in the shoes of the other, and not to pass judgment, and not to evaluate, and not to compare. And I think because I do it on a daily basis with my patients, it might have been easier for me to do it in my interviews.
And have you had, I just want to know if you've had any pushback about the fact that you're telling this story as an Israeli Jew yourself?
Well, the pushback, both when I interviewed Germans and when I interviewed Palestinians, there were people who dropped out at the last moment. And I think it had to do with the fact that there was an Israeli Jew. Some people among the Palestinians saw it as a sign of normalization to talk to me, even though, I live in the United States for 40 years. And, there was nothing I could do about that. And then there were Germans that were afraid to open up the history of their own families because there was still family member alive and who were not interested that their story would be heard. So on both sides, I experienced that. But I also experienced in my screenings, which I did all over the United States and also in Israel, there were people who questioned and became even angry because they felt that I might be comparing the Holocaust to the Nakba. And, I gave it a lot of thought. I am not comparing because suffering cannot be compared. Suffering cannot be measured, and there is no scale that can hold suffering and get results who suffered more. It's suffering. So there is no way to compare the two events. But they still exist in correlation to each other.
Well, you're right. It is a long road to recovery for things like this, and everyone experiences these sort of things in a different way. So, Ofra Bloch, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much.